Man, this thing. So, what do you do when there's not enough of these to go around, but you still need your GIs to throw 45 auto at people? In World War I, you jam 45 auto into a revolver. Now, one interesting thing about this particular revolver is I'm guessing, due to the finish, that it's been reassembled and probably went through World War II or maybe even Vietnam. I don't think anyone fit the trigger parts back together when they did this. The trigger pull on this gun is the most atrocious and heavy thing I have ever felt in my life. Even cocking the thing into single action takes probably somewhere on the order of like 20 pounds. Once you're in single action, it shoots fine, but most combat handguns in general are not meant to be fired in single action, so, or at least modern combat handguns. World War I, maybe they're still doing that, but this thing in double action is pretty hard to shoot straight up. It's better up close, which is what combat handguns are for, but at distance, if you shoot double action, the sheer force just to get the trigger to go off is pretty ridiculous. But not, I'm happy with that. That was only like 10 yards. Hey guys, welcome back to Triple F Shooting. Today we're going to be looking at one of my favorites from a historical standpoint, the M1917, this particular one being a Colt revolver. So what we're going to start with is just a brief history of the revolver and then kind of break down its different attributes and shooting characteristics. The M1917 showed up because there was a lack of this particular pistol. This one is also a Colt and is actually a World War I era. Now, this one has been re-blued, I do believe, so it takes away from some of the collectible value, but hoping to put some new springs and stuff in this, maybe have a gunsmith look it over, and actually get to shoot this thing, because it's really cool to have this piece of history. So, World War I, the 1911 exists, but there's not enough of them going around. So the U.S. Army asks Colt and Smith & Wesson to come up with a supplement by way of making their large frame revolvers shoot a 45 auto. So at the time, they were either running, I think the Smith & Wesson also had a 45 Colt double action if I'm not mistaken, but mainly running a 44 special in a triple lock, and then I don't have one of those sadly, but there was also the Colt New Service, which is, if you know what that is, this looks very similar because it basically is. So how do you make a revolver that's supposed to shoot a 45 Colt shoot a 45 auto? That is the issue that they had to deal with back then, because the military did not want to switch rounds during the war, so we need something supplemental that still shoots all the ammo that we have set up, logistically speaking. Smith & Wesson actually came up with the half moon clip. I will probably take a picture because seeing this tiny little thing is going to be difficult, but we do have a quick segment kind of showing that thing in action. And now you may be asking, how in the crap do you put 45 auto into a revolver? Well, with my cute apron of death, that's how. These are called half moon clips. So you can see that there is a three round clip on the back. My apron of death carries 2. So I will pull those 2. Drop them into the gun. So instead of loading 6 individual rounds, I load 2 halves, making my 6. Close the gun up. It's going to create good headspace for me, and then I can shoot the thing. The other cool part is when I'm done with the shooting, I get to go like this. And all those moon clips and everything come out as one piece. I'm ready to go again. Now, one interesting point, if Wikipedia can be believed, the Smith & Wesson company is actually who came up with those moon clips, and because it was wartime and the Army needed them, Colt got to use the exact same thing in their design, basically free of charge. Just in case it wasn't clear in the footage of the moon clips, basically all those are meant to do is headspace correctly, so I'll probably get a couple pictures, but you can see there's a fairly large gap behind the cylinder of this revolver, which is meant to run moon clips, and on this revolver that is not meant to run moon clips, you have maybe a little bit less. The 45 Colt rim does fill up a lot of that space. So while we're looking at this, again, all empty and yay, this is the Colt New Service, which we have a very quick little comparison of this gun. Okay. So this gun comes from So the military version we just showed is in 45 auto. This gun from Colt New Service, chambered in 45 Colt. So we've got our big old, don't mind the gold bullet, that's my reload. We've got our big old hefty 250 grain slug. You can see the gun looks extremely similar. Well, let's shoot this thing for fun. This one's trigger was probably fit from the factory, so it actually shoots really nice. Very smooth, excellent trigger. And then 45 Colt or recoil is very similar to the 45 auto. I think that was it. And on our loading and unloading, we're doing everything one at a time. Obviously, ejection is still kind of all at once, but I have individual rounds rather than stuck together moon clips. I just really like this gun. It's very pretty. All right. Okay, so finally in World War I, about 150,000 of the Colt revolvers were produced, and somewhere around like 151 or maybe 153,000 of the Smith & Wesson revolvers were produced to fire the 45 auto using moon clips. Those revolvers originally would have been blued very similarly to that older Colt New Service and 45 Colt that you saw. You'll notice that this revolver is not blued, it is Parkerized. You'll probably also have noticed that there's an M1 Garand laying on the table. One of the really cool things about this revolver is it did not only serve in World War I, but also went through World War II. So that process saw a lot of these revolvers basically refurbished or re-arsenaled, however you like to look at it. So the finish was redone, thus the Parkerization, and any updates to the mechanisms that needed to happen if anything was out of whack or whatever. I believe that is what happened to this particular revolver, because the trigger is basically like trying to pull a concrete block across the table with your finger. It is abysmally bad. Even cocking the action in single action takes a decent amount of force. What I think that is, and someone can correct me if they know better than me, is when the revolver was re-arsenaled, those parts were probably not hand fit as best as they could have been. So you're dragging metal against metal and kind of fighting internals to get it there. If I shot it like a bazillion times, it might smooth out. But compared to my original New Service revolver from like the 1920s, it's chambered in 45 Colt, its trigger is like buttered ball bearings on a glass surface compared to this big giant concrete block thing. However, it is quite shootable. You can still do it. It just takes a ton of force. So that, I believe, is what happened when this thing was set up for World War II service. In World War II, it was not as used as in World War I. However, it was given to a lot of artillery, anybody that was kind of rear echelon or specialized troops. So airmen, tankers. If you've seen the movie Fury, There's one of these with some pretty ridiculous like pinup girl grips on it in the hands of War Daddy, or whatever his actual name was off the top of my head, I can't remember, but it's played by Brad Pitt. So this gun pops up in that movie with a fairly heavy roll. Kind of neat. It also went through the Korean War in small numbers, and even all the way into, you're seeing some Vietnam era stuff on the table, even all the way into the Vietnam War in very limited numbers. So as far as a service weapon goes, this one saw quite a bit of combat. If you want to look at it that way, the 1911 and 1911A1 saw a ton too, because this thing went all the way from World War I up into the 80s and even into the 90s for the Marine Corps. So kind of a lot. Not quite as impressive as 1911, but still very cool for a gun that was knocking bullets all over. Still very cool for a gun that was not really ever meant to be in existence and was sort of a oh crap moment. And I think that's one of my favorite things about this gun. Alright, so since this is a combat handgun, we're going to get at more of a combat distance. We're at about 7 yards. I'm going to rip these off in double action, one-handed, about as quick as I can. Get the rounds out and reload for my apron of death and see how that goes. So for giggles, we'll time it. This probably isn't going to be fast. I guess we should load before we start timing. So, 1 moon clip, 2 moon clips. This is a fairly cool way to load your gun. One problem. If your moon clip is very slightly bent, which is going to be really hard for you to tell if it is or not, one thing you'll run into is they don't really want to go in the gun. So you can see there, if you get real close, it's just a hair kicked off of the cylinder case. That probably means it's not going to load. Yeah, we're good. Okay, I guess we should draw to make it more fun. So out of this really awful production flap holster, there we go, we're all buttoned up. Gotta use my left apron. There it is. So I actually short shucked the trigger and got like halfway through a rotation and did it, so I just kind of chased it all the way around. Which, if I was in combat and freaking out, I'd probably just keep hammering until I was all clicks. So, semi-realistic. Let's see how we did. I'm very happy with that grouping. That was 21 seconds to get 12 rounds off with a revolver. I did not shoot at the head at all with this particular revolver. These are all the 45 Colt New Service. This is all from the 1917. All right, so now that we have the history out of the way on this thing, let's get into some of the shooting characteristics. First off, this is a big, chunky, heavy revolver. It is definitely not meant for any form of concealed carry. I don't have a weight off the top of my head. I'll have to throw a number in here somewhere for you. But pretty hefty. Feels quite a bit more hefty in hand than, say, the 1911A1. Now, it has a fairly straight down grip angle. We'll kind of start at the butt and move forward. One of the things that I dislike about the setup of the New Service is the fact that, if you can see, the grip is actually wider at the butt than it is at the heel or the shoulder of the gun, however you want to call that. What that does, and if I play the video here you might be able to see it, but what that does is essentially during one-handed fire, your hand is driven up the gun with every subsequent round, and eventually you're kind of riding the heel or that shoulder with the web of your hand, which is not terrible, but it definitely is not as comfortable as shooting from the main part of the grip. However, the higher on the gun, the less recoil. So once your hand just rides up there, which usually are on your last couple of rounds anyway, you do have less muzzle flip at those shots. The trigger reach is fairly long, so I have large size hands, spindly fingers, but they are long, and reaching the trigger, it is just barely getting in the pad of there. So in double action, this is a fairly long trigger pull. With somebody with smaller hands, that's probably going to be a no-go. You can absolutely fire the thing in single action. Again, with this particular one, that is a fairly chunky trigger pull, but you can see that trigger reach has drastically decreased by cocking the thing. So that's nice. Reloading with moon clips, as you probably saw in the clip earlier, I can throw another one in here if we feel like it, but is a whole lot easier than individually feeding rounds. Now, because this is a Colt, you have the pull type release for the cylinder. So Smith & Wesson, I'm going to push forward with my thumb. On a Colt, I'm actually going to grab this latch, pull it to the rear, and then push the cylinder through with my other hand. Ejection is similar on pretty much any revolver that you'd run into. When you eject, you do throw the entire moon clip set out so that you can put a whole new set right back in. And load her back up. The sights on the thing are kind of similar to everything else at the time for pistol sights. By our standards today, they're pretty awful. They absolutely work and are fairly accurate even. They're just not terribly easy to pick up quickly. Alright, so this thing has an insane trigger pull, so we're just going to do single action, but we're at about 20 yards and see if I can hit anything with it. As far as the sights go, they seem to be fairly on, at least on our paper target. So all that goes at kind of mashing, so let's see if we can get any accuracy out of the thing. One hand. That threw a rock like 100 feet. There we go. Too high. Rushed it. Oh my God, come on now. I didn't do it at first. It's actually very accurate. Every time I hit the trigger when I was, when I missed, I pretty much knew exactly where that round was going. So the sights are fairly rough, have a very small gutter, and then a great big blade. So when you're looking at that, you kind of get like a tiny little bead and a tiny little V. But back in the day, that was fairly common. And for as old as this thing is, that was much better than I thought it'd do. So kind of cool. A lot of people would consider for combat shooting, you're probably not going to be using a ton of your sights. You're going to be looking over the top of the gun and just hammering away, especially if you are really freaked out and you haven't trained a whole lot on the thing. You do have a fairly distinctive shark fin kind of front sight. On the Smith & Wessons, it's a rounded kind of half coin look. And then I believe this is just a 5-inch barrel, very similar to what you'd have on a 1911. So ballistically speaking, it might be 5.5. Ballistically speaking, you're going to be very similar. You are going to lose a very small amount of feet per second or gases out of that forcing cone to cylinder gap. So there's that. Two-handed shooting with this is a whole lot easier to do. You can be a crap load faster, more supportive, which, duh. However, during World War I, this would have probably been taught to shot with one hand. Another interesting fact, in World War I, if I can find some pictures of guys wearing this thing, they were still wearing it on the left side of them in like butt forward cross draw fashion. World War II saw that roll around the other hip, and then Korean and Vietnam War would have been in a similar fashion, but kind of interesting that at the time still worn in like a cross draw setup. That pretty much covers the shooting characteristics. As far as this gun goes, my main reasons for owning and purchasing the thing are historical in nature, clearly. The really cool thing is it sort of fits along with a wide variety of firearms. I wish I had a World War I thing laying here. That happens to be with my father, a couple of those, so maybe it'll come back out in those videos. But this is such a neat part of history to, like we said earlier, this is an oh crap, what do we do kind of gun. And it turned out to be fairly successful in combat and fairly successful in the commercial market. 45 auto rim, which is not terribly popular. It was actually created because of revolvers like this and the Smith & Wesson. So neat to have something similar to the 1851 cartridge conversion, 1858 cartridge conversion, where what do we do with what we've got on hand? So kind of a neat piece of American ingenuity, and that is why I like this thing. So with all that said, thanks for watching Triple F Shooting, and we will see you in the next episode. Ta-da! Little load one. So stay there. Those are not. That would have been fun.